Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner, and I'm here to talk with you about 5x5 stats in baseball. What am I even talking about? There are 5 stats for hitting and 5 stats for pitching. Whether you're playing rotisserie or head-to-head, you need to know what these stats are, but you also need to know how to value these stats. Now, we had an earlier video where Ross talked about what the stats are, so go check that out if you need to know what those stats are. I'm going to be talking about them here. Now it's about how do we value these stats? And I have a feeling I know what you're asking. Aren't all of them equal? Well, yes and no. They all have the same inherent value, but how you get the best balance is what's important. So you need to know what to prioritize, what to get just enough of, and what stats can be gotten in one package. We're going to start with hitting, then we'll do pitching. So the 5 stats in hitting: runs, home runs, RBIs, stolen bases, and batting average. Those are the typical ones used in most leagues. We'll get into a little bit of what some other types are, but that's what you're usually going to find when you're looking at hitting in baseball. Now, in a vacuum, there's actually a stat that's more important than the others, and it's the home run. Why is that? These stats should be equal. You're competing in all 5 categories. But here's the thing. A home run is a hit. It's a home run, of course. It's a run, and it's possibly multiple RBIs. So the chances are very good that if you win the home run category, you're going to be ahead in a lot of the other categories. Is it always true? Of course not. There are home run hitters who are killing the ball, but they're going to kill your batting average. So it's not going to win everything, but I do find it is the most important stat in hitting. But here's the thing. You're either going to have to build your team around power and punt batting average. Just forget about it. Or you're going to have to find players that hit for power and don't hurt you in average. Now, obviously, you'd rather do the second of the two if you can. You want to compete in every category you can, or you're not likely to win. You can minimize the damage, though, if you've got a low batting average hitter. Bring in a high average hitter who hits for a little less power, and it's a nice combination. You also are going to need steals. Steals, though, they're not as important to the other stats, but they're much more rare than every other stat. You can find home runs on the wire. You can find RBIs, runs, even batting average. You can find it all on the wire. What you usually can't find as well is steals. So how do you get them into your lineup without killing the rest of your stats? Well, here's the thing. Stolen base guys do tend to get on fairly often, so their batting average doesn't tend to be terrible, and their runs are pretty decent, but they're going to bring down your power. So you are going to have to prioritize steals. But here's the thing, and this is probably pretty obvious to many of you, but what you need to prioritize, especially early in the draft, is guys who give you everything. If you get a guy who hits for power and has speed, you're building in those stolen bases without losing out on power. Go early in the draft for guys who give you both. And prioritize hitting because this is the hardest commodity to find. A power speed guy who's going to give you everything you need. Later in the draft, you're going to have to pick your poison. You're going to have to identify players that don't hurt you as much as others. Either a guy that has enough speed and at least is going to provide a lot of runs, even if he's not going to hit for power. But you don't want a steals guy that's going to hit for no power. You got to try to find somebody who's going to hit for at least a little. Give me 10 home runs from a steals guy. Ultimately, which stat is most important is how you build your team. Now, batting average is in some ways the least important because you can't adjust it much over time. Once it gets going, it tends to be stuck. You want to have flexibility in these categories, so you don't really want to prioritize batting average that much. First of all, it's not very predictable. There's a lot of variation in it across seasons. Secondly, as I said, you can't adjust it that much. And thirdly, the value you get out of batting average really isn't affecting the other categories that much. It's probably going to help you in runs because it's more times on base, but otherwise it's not helping. This is why I like to go for home runs because it is built into the equation of everything else. Just find a guy who doesn't hurt you in batting average. It's not easy to find a great catcher, and what you really want is one that isn't going to drain your batting average and hits for some decent power. Draft a speed guy or two that don't hurt you as much in power, and then go for power. Okay, so you got 5 categories, but they're not all created equal, and you need to know when to draft what. Let's move to pitching because we've got the same situation there. You need to know which stats to prioritize. For example, saves are important. They're one of the 5 categories, but they are the most readily available stat on the wire. Why is that? Well, there's so much turnover at the closer position. At least half the closers in the league are not going to be the closers by the end of the year. So you can find that value on the wire. What you can't find is an ace pitcher who's going to go deep into games and has great numbers across the board. You got to prioritize the guys early in the draft, just like in hitting, who give you everything. I would say prioritize hitting more than pitching early in the draft because it's much harder to find the power speed guys. Now, the most important stat in a vacuum for pitching is whip, walks and hits per innings pitched. Okay? This determines how many men get on base. If you're trying to look at whip, it's telling you how many guys are in the game who are likely to score. You don't want them to score against your pitcher, of course. You can't score without getting on base. So this means your ERA, that's earned run average, which is much more luck-based, is also lower with a lower whip because less men are getting on base, so less men are going to score. Earned run average is a measure of how many people score. Elite pitchers limit base runners with strikeouts as well. So you're going to find guys who actually have a good whip, but they don't strike out enough guys. They're going to be hurting you in one category. The ones that give you everything are pitchers that have great whip and strike out a lot of guys. It's just like the home run hitter who has speed. This is what you're looking for early in drafts. Great whip with strikeouts. Meanwhile, a good whip is often a sign that pitchers are striking people out anyway because that means a lot of people aren't reaching base. You can't compete without getting some of everything, though. You do have to prioritize every category. So the next most important to whip is strikeouts. Why is that? Well, they're certainly good in the strikeout category, but they also just prevent base runners. This means your ERA is going to be lower, your whip's going to be lower, and meanwhile, it's a counting stat. This is important. There are certain stats that you can catch up later in the season. You're not going to be able to catch up in ratios necessarily late in the season. What do I mean by that? Batting average is a ratio stat. Whip is a ratio stat. ERA is a ratio stat. It takes the numbers across the season and is an average. So it's going to be much harder to move as things go. A counting stat, which would be strikeouts, wins, and saves, those move more. And the easiest one to move by far is strikeouts. One of the reasons for that is you can pick up a middle reliever they tend to have great strikeout ratios and are readily available, and you can make that go way up. You can make it go up fast. You can't adjust the other ones. So while whip, I think, is the most important of the pitching categories, strikeouts is definitely next. Now, wins are very luck-based. A lot of times people think, oh, I'm going to win a lot of games because I drafted players on these teams that are going to win. Well, I'll tell you what, as is true in many sports, you don't always know which teams are going to win. So I wouldn't try to predict that. On top of that, there's a lot of tough luck losses. You can have a guy pitch great. He throws 9 innings of 1-run ball and loses, and you don't get that win. And then you have somebody blow a save, and the team comes back and wins. They didn't even pitch well, and you got the win. Well, that's the thing about wins. It's luck-based. In fact, there's a lot of leagues that prefer substituting some of these statistics for others. Let's take batting average. Jumping back to hitting for a second. Well, a lot of people prefer to use on-base percentage because it is a more true indicator of the good hitters. They draw walks. They get on base in other ways. You can have a good batting average but not get on with walks. You're not as good of a hitter that way. When it comes to wins, the measurement that I would go to if I were to switch away from it is quality starts. What that tells me is the pitcher pitched well. Usually that is at least 5 innings of 3 earned runs or less. Now, 5 innings, 3 earned runs is actually not so much of a quality start, but that's just the baseline. Everything beyond that is what you're looking for. Some leagues have 5 innings pitched, 2 earned runs. I think that's a little too stringent. But here's the thing. In most leagues you're in, you're going to be playing for wins. Don't prioritize this much in the draft. It's very hard to predict. There's no way to know what's going to happen. It's unpredictable what happens in games. Sure, you could use it maybe, I'd say, as a tiebreaker. You're looking at 2 starters. I'm going to go with the team that looks like they're going to win more often. But most of the time, it's not very predictable. In pitching, prioritize whip and strikeouts and get bargain value for saves since closers lose their jobs all the time. The other stats will follow. If you need help or have any questions about fantasy baseball, comment below. Click that like button to stay connected and see you on the Fake Diamond.